Hello and a very, very good morning, good afternoon or good evening, depending on which part of the world you're checking in from. I hope you're having a fantastic day so far. Thank you so much for taking time to be part of today's webinar. I am Sharada Murthy. I'm a product expert in Manage Engine AD Self-Service Plus, and I work with the marketing team here at Manage Engine. I am going to be your presenter for the day. Before I jump into today's session, I would like to do a very quick audio and video check. So if you can hear me loud and clear, and if you have no issues in viewing the screen, please drop in a yes message in the chat box provided. I'm going to wait for a couple of confirmations before I proceed further with today's session. If you can hear me loud and clear, and if you have no issues in viewing the screen, please drop in a yes message in the chat box provided. Thank you so much. Thank you for your confirmations. A very quick disclaimer before I proceed further with today's session. I am checking in from India. I'm working remotely, and I am sitting in the comfort of my home when I'm doing this webinar. But you know how the home network can be once in a while. So in case there are any technical glitches, in case you have any issues at any point of time with the audio or video, please keep me notified by dropping a message in the chat box. With Zoom, I unfortunately do not have an audience view as a presenter, so I wouldn't know if the broadcast is seamless unless you notify me. So I'm looking forward to your message. That said, with no further delay, I'm going to jump to talk about securing access to endpoints with multi-factor authentication. Before I do so, I want to understand what part of the audience who've joined me here today are existing customers of AD Self-Service Plus or are evaluating the solution. So please take a couple of seconds to answer the poll that you see on the screen. If you are an existing customer, if you are an existing customer, pardon me, please let me know by checking in the first option. This will help me, approach the session in a way that's beneficial to all of you here today. All right, thank you so much. Perfect. All right. So the good news is the majority of you who joined me here today are customers of AD Self-Service Plus. So I believe you are familiar with the application and have a good idea of how to work with it. And I'm going to walk you through how you can enable or secure your endpoints, your organization's access to endpoints with multi-factor authentication. But before we do that, I think the important question is to understand why we have to enable multi-factor authentication, right? These are numbers, these are quick facts that put things into perspective, all right? Especially with these pressing times where a big part of the world is still working remotely or working in a hybrid mode, our identities are more susceptible to compromise. Cybersecurity attacks have increased by a whooping 400% year on year and are continuing to increase. July has been a terrific month already. We've already had multiple ransomware breaches and zero-day exploits that have happened globally. And it's important to protect user identities because even today, more than 30% of cybersecurity attacks are social engineering attacks, right? So your organization can be susceptible to password breaches or identity breaches. And with multi-factor authentication, you can prevent 4 out of 5 password-based breaches. You can definitely prevent 99% of identity breaches that happen. And these are numbers shared by Microsoft. Microsoft, in fact, very, very confidently says with multi-factor authentication enabled, you can prevent close to 99% of cybersecurity attacks or identity breaches that are potentially targeting an organization. But that said, we also need to understand that two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication is not a replacement for better passwords. We need to work with better passwords. We need to safeguard the first factor of authentication as well, which is in most cases passwords. So that is what today's session is going to be all about. I'll walk you through how you can enable better password policies, customize different password policies for different user groups with AD Self-Service Plus, and then move on to talk about how many pardon me, how you can enable different authenticators at different endpoints, different checkpoints in which MFA is important and critical, and once again, how you can customize this for different user groups as well, all right? So now is the how MFA works. I'm sure you're all familiar with how MFA works. At some point of time, you would have authenticated your identity, if not for your native Active Directory or your applications, business applications that you have worked with. I'm sure you would have made use of MFA for banking applications, certain email accounts as well, many critical applications. So it's pretty straightforward. You just introduce an additional user identity verifier as an authentication source before a particular user gets access to an endpoint in this particular case. We're also going to look at a live example of VPNs and applications as well. But coming back to how MFA works with AD Self-Service Plus, your first factor of authentication is always going to be your native Active Directory password because AD Self-Service Plus operates based on Active Directory authentication. And you can also introduce multiple authenticators, anything from security codes to biometrics to hardware token as well. So yes, that is how MFA works. Pretty simple and straightforward, and pretty easy to deploy as well, and which is what I'm going to talk about next. So yes, let's collectively work towards improving password security with AD Self-Service Plus. I understand that most of you who have joined me here today have AD Self-Service Plus or have used AD Self-Service Plus. But even if not, if you have an inbuilt application, if you have another third-party tool that you can make use of, fundamentally the concept is the same. Revisit your password policy, introduce additional authenticators, all right? And I will be walking you through how you can achieve this with the application, the in-house application today. But before I do that, I want to understand what part of the audience who've joined me here today work on a hybrid infrastructure. What part of you are completely on premises and what part of you are completely on the cloud? So if you work on a hybrid infrastructure, please let me know by dropping a message in the chat box with the word hybrid. If you're completely on premises, please say on premises. If you work with private, public, or hybrid cloud, please drop in cloud in the chat console. This is just to understand what your infrastructure is like and to also address troubles that you majorly go through, especially when you're talking about user identity security or password related security issues that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, all right? I'm going to wait in for a couple of answers, but in the meantime, very quickly jumping to share the demo link for all of you in the chat console. So to those of you who do not have an instance up and running right now, you could make use of the AD Self-Service Plus demo. Please access the chat console to click on the link. You will be able to log in as an administrator and explore the application along with me. No sign up required, no credentials required. It's a live actionable hands-on demo, so you will be able to explore the application along with me. But what I've done here is I have pre-configured an instance. I've taken a remote desktop connection. I've created a domain. I've logged in directly as an administrator. I've created a test domain, sorted users into OUs and groups, and we will be working with this particular lab set here today. I also have my AD Self-Service Plus instance pre-configured, all right? So let's start with the first layer of defense. Before we talk about protecting identities, let's start with the first layer of defense, which is passwords in itself. So I'm gonna hit to change a password, jumping to the Gina CP console right here. Let me try to reset password for the user, Sharada, keying in my old password. I have my custom granular password policy displayed, and I am deliberately giving in a password that I know is weak. All right, I'm going to display this for you. It's password at 123 hash. It's part of multiple leaked databases. It's definitely a predictable pattern, a weak password, and easily susceptible to compromise. But I also want you to notice that this particular password checks multiple boxes. It checks multiple complexities right here. But when I click on enter, what's going to happen is this particular password is being rejected, along with reasons as to why it's being rejected. And that is because the AD Self-Service Plus granular password policy takes into account password entropy, which is the susceptibility factor of a particular password from being compromised. All right. And yes, that said, this particular password is clearly being rejected because it has the common word and dictionary word password. And I am going to walk you through another example. I have a user who I have not enabled a custom granular password policy for. So I'm keying in the old password. I'm going to give in a new password. Enter the new password. And this particular password is a predictable password. It is susceptible to compromise. Let me quickly show you what it is. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with a character followed by characters from the username, special character, and characters followed characters from the username. But what's interesting about this particular password is it is an acceptable native AD password. If I hit enter, this password reset will be successful. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to deliberately set a weak password, but you know what I mean, right? So traditionally, even when you have predictable patterns as passwords, Native Active Directory accepts these passwords, and this is the biggest trouble because the problem is not with passwords being susceptible to compromise. The problem is not with passwords being weak. The problem is that these weak passwords and predictable patterns are accepted by the Native Active Directory password policy. So you need to up your game, and let's start there. Strengthen passwords with the granular password policy. All right. I have logged into AD Self-Service Plus. It's the first exercise in today's agenda. I'm going to jump to the configuration tab right here, move to password policy enforcer. And yes, here we go. I have a custom granular password policy enforced for this particular user group admin. I also want to stress on the fact that this is not an ideal password policy because it has multiple character restrictions. It has multiple restrictions in terms of repetition, length, and pattern. And this can cause password fatigue. This can cause difficulty for users to meet all these complexity rules, right? So the reason why I have deliberately configured this is to let you know having a good password policy is not about checking multiple boxes, because even if you enforce all these character restrictions, password at 123 will still be accepted. And that is typically what you want to avoid. So what I've done here is when I'm working with the advanced password policies, I have restricted based on characters from the username, characters from the old password. I can also restrict predictable patterns, input my own custom list. I will be able to restrict the entire dictionary, play around with length, enforce a minimum length of 13 and above, or allow users to work with passphrases. And with just the complexity rules that I've named right now, you can prevent a huge chunk of brute force attack, password history-based attack, incremental password-based attack, pattern-based attack. And this is very critical because with this custom granular password policy, you are defending the first layer of security, which is passwords in itself, right? So please pay attention to your password policy. Do not rely on just the Native Active Directory password policy. And the good news is with this custom granular password policy that you have customized for different user groups in your organization, right? I do not have one for finance, but I'll be able to customize different complexity rules for different user groups. The important aspect here is that this is universal. So you will also be able to enforce this for G Suite, Salesforce, Zendesk, and multiple applications for which we support password resets and synchronization. This is specific to AD Self-Service Plus, but this is also ideal because if you have an advanced granular password policy that takes into account password entropy, then you can stay multiple steps ahead of potential cybersecurity attacks. You can safeguard user identities. That said, we also integrate with Have I Been Pawned, which helps you, establish a safe, seamless integration. And the good news here is that it disallows users from working with compromised passwords that have been part of leaked databases, a huge repository of passwords that have been compromised, that are predictable. And this will keep you, once again, multiple steps ahead of potential cybersecurity attacks. Important, extremely critical. Step one is to strengthen passwords with the granular password policy. And I hope that you have the bandwidth to revisit your password policy today, right after this session, to see how easy and susceptible users in your organization are, especially with the native Active Directory password policy that you're working with. And what you can do to improve this experience for users is to display the complexity rules for users, making it easy for them to know what complexity rules that they have to meet and how they can work with or have better passwords or work with better password practices. All right, that said, once we have taken care of the first layer of defense, which is passwords in itself, first factor of authentication, which is AD, you also will definitely safeguard multiple other applications for which you make use of AD authentication. Outlook, for example, VPNs, for example, right? And this is just a great place to start. That said, moving on, with the advancements in cybersecurity attacks today, it's important to not just rely on one factor of authentication. It's important to not rely on just one user identity verification. And that is why two-factor authentication is important. Start with a minimum of one additional factor of authentication. You can definitely increase authenticators when you're working with critical accounts, administrative accounts, privilege accounts, and definitely work with privileged applications as well. Increase increase authenticators as users get used to working with additional factors of authentication to verify user identity, especially remote users, especially users who are checking in from different parts of the country, different parts of the state, city, VPN users as well. It's critical to safeguard your VPN access with two-factor authentication. And thankfully, I have a setup up and running to show you how this works. So let's start with VPN. All right. I want to very quickly let you know that I have a couple of configurations pre-enabled, and this is just for, a combination of authenticators that I can walk you through today. These are not recommended authenticators. These are not recommended settings as well. Please work with authenticators that are suitable for users in your organization. That said, I am going to take a VPN connection to my cloud setup. I enter Adam's first factor of authentication. Adam is not even a real user. It's a test user created for today's webinar session. My first factor of authentication is my native Active Directory password policy, which I believe is the case for, multiple users in your organization as well, multiple organizations as well. And what's going to happen here is only if I verify my identity with a secondary factor of authentication can I log on. I have pre-configured or enabled Google Authenticator as my mode of authentication, VPN authentication, endpoint authentication for this particular user group. I'm going to wait for the connection to be successful, just a couple of seconds there. It's also a time-based password. So time is a critical factor. I hope I entered the password right on time and the verification is true. In the meantime, if you have any questions, if you have any specific use cases or scenarios that you are trying to establish in your organization, please drop in your messages in the Q&A tab. And with that, I have established a seamless connection to my VPN. It's pretty user-friendly, it's pretty straightforward, but this is going to save you a lot of trouble, especially if one particular factor of authentication is compromised, especially if passwords are compromised. Users' identities, users' access to endpoints, access to network is still protected. Users' data is still protected. And like I said, you can prevent nearly 4 out of 5 cybersecurity attacks and nearly 99% of identity compromises with multi-factor authentication. That said, let's also look at an example of how this works while a user tries to log on to their remote machine. I am working with a test setup, so I'm going to take a remote desktop connection to another user account. Sorry for the lag. I have multiple applications running in a small system, this virtual system that I'm working with. So once in a while, it decides to act up, and I'm sorry about that. I need to upgrade my systems, and I should be able to do that as soon as I get to work, because I will have a backup up and running. All right, I'm going to wait for that particular RDP connection to load. There we go. It's taking a lot longer than I anticipated. Sorry about that. Keying in my first factor of authentication, which is my AD password. I click on OK. I am waiting for the connection to be established to this particular computer, this particular user, for this particular user. What would typically happen, what you could expect is on successful user identity verification with AD passwords, we will usually have an access to our remote desktop connection, right? I'm going to wait for the access to this particular system, to this particular user to see how things are going to roll out. Sorry about the delay. Right. Would it usually take this long? No, but I just experienced the power fluctuation. So it's reconnecting with my backup internet, and that is why it's taking this long. I hope the connection is okay. I hope my voice is still audible and the display is clear, but in case you experience any issues with the broadcast, please keep me notified by dropping a message in the chat box. Yes, so what I'm going to do is I am going to verify my identity with a secondary factor authentication. And that is because I have enabled TFA for my endpoints as well, for my Windows machine in this particular case. I can also selectively work with different authenticators based on different user groups that I'm working with. All right, I have a new code on my Microsoft app. I click on continue. And yes, on successful user identity verification. All right, that did not go well. I'm going to reconnect. I believe I lost my connection. Let's very quickly go through that again. Sorry about that. But I know that the user identity verification was successful, because otherwise I will have a prompt letting me know that my verification code is wrong. So I'm going to do it one more time. Microsoft Authenticator, clicking in the CAPTCHA. I click on continue. I'm going to key in the CAPTCHA because the code is just about to expire. Continue. I can choose to trust this particular machine as well for the next 180 days. So yes, on successful user identity verification, I will then have a secured access to my machine, to my Windows machine in this particular case. If I choose to bypass a particular authenticator, or if I do not have access to a particular authenticator, I will definitely be denied access to log on. If I key in the wrong user identity verification answers or passcodes, I will still be denied access to this particular endpoint. And that's the level of security we are trying to establish. I'm going to very quickly skip this because it's taking a lot of time to load, but I know for a fact that I have logged into the user Sharda's account. There we go. Very quickly minimizing this, jumping back to AD Self-Service Plus right here. Let me walk you through how you can enable this with AD Self-Service Plus on an organization level. And if you, like I mentioned earlier, if you have multiple other authenticators or applications that you're working with that allows you to do this, that allows you to enable MFA, I would highly urge you to explore the options that's available and deploy MFA for every single user account, for every endpoint and application. And collectively, we will be able to avoid user identity compromise and protect or safeguard user identities at the end of the day, protect data, because that is the level of security we need to have, especially with remote working. We need to have that level of security to not be easily susceptible to prey, not be easily susceptible to user identity compromise. All right. Yes, talking about how you can work with different authenticators, I have about 3 self-service policies that I've created across 2 domains that I'm working with. So I will be able to selectively enable different authenticators for different user groups, but this is simply the configuration step for different user groups. All right, so when I'm working with admin, for instance, this is basically a self-service policy with the administrative users. So when I jump to MFA right here for reset and unlock, I have the provision to set my level of authentication, pick the authenticators that I would like to give users the option from, choosing to verify user identity. I can also set particular authenticators as mandatory, which is what I've done with the password reset process. The same holds good for the AD self-service plus logon, which in turn will be enforced for single sign-on applications as well. So you can enable two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication for SSO applications as well with the help of AD self-service plus, and also pick the level of authenticator that you'd like to enable and what authenticators you'd like to enable for your machine logons of Windows, Mac, and Linux systems, as well as your VPN logons as well. So this is an example that we just went through. For administrative users, the machine logon, we have one amongst security question and Microsoft Authenticator that they can use to verify user identity. Like I said, these are not recommended settings. I'm just working with a combination of authenticators today. Please work with authenticators that are comfortable for users in your organization, that are comfortable to deploy for you as well, even as administrators and IT security specialists. And I would highly urge introducing biometrics as one additional factor of authentication, because it's extremely personal and it's also extremely safe. It's one of the safest authenticators available out there. So you can definitely enable multi-factor authentication with biometrics, along with password and one code-based authentication sent to users' mobile device or other accounts that belong to them. All right. With that, I am going to quickly wrap up the session with one last topic that I want to talk about, which is enabling two-factor authentication for single sign-on applications. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please keep them coming. What I am going to do is open a new tab, access my G Suite. All right. I am going to pick this particular user's G Suite account. I click on next, and what's going to happen here is, since I have enabled single sign-on for this particular user, AD-based single sign-on for this particular user, I will be redirected to the AD self-service plus console. Sorry about my internet connection and the lag. Sincere apologies. It's been acting up for the last couple of hours, and it's also raining out here. So there is constant fluctuation between 4G and 3G. And I'm experiencing this in my end because I see that the screen freezes many a time. So I'm really sorry about that. But yes, with this particular workflow for AD self-service plus single sign-on, you will be able to customize the screen that you're looking at. I've not done that because I'm working with the default settings. I also have to log in and access the administrative logon. But once you introduce single sign-on for users in your organization, enable them for particular applications, you will be able to also enforce two-factor authentication while they first try to log in and access a particular application. All right, so I'm going to work with security question answers. I have an option to key in my security questions, choose to trust the browser as well. It could be a one-time verification. You could also have it every single time the user logs in. And you can also choose to disable it. That's completely up to you. It's customizable. But on successful user identity verification, you will be able to seamlessly allow users to access these applications. And this workflow kicks in only if the AD verification needs a check, and that is only if the user has not logged on to AD Self-Service Plus end user portal, all right? So when they're trying to access a single tenant enabled application, you can choose to enable this particular workflow. So what's going to happen, what's the advantage is that you can restrict certain users from accessing certain applications, working with the principle of least privilege. You can also ensure that the right person is accessing the right application, the right account at the right time. And this is for more than 100 pre-configured applications. So you saw that I started at my Google email link, and I had to verify my identity with AD authentication, AD Self-Service Plus authenticators before I even have access to my Google account for this particular user. So yes, also pay attention to your applications as well, safeguard access to applications as well, cloud applications, third-party applications, both on-premises and cloud-based. And yes, with that, I have almost come to the end of today's session. A very quick recap, and I'm also open to questions. Please drop in your questions if you have any. Yes, talking about securing access to endpoints with MFA. It's important to first pay attention to the first factor of authentication, which is native active directory passwords. If you're working with an on-premises infrastructure, an hybrid infrastructure, because the password policy that we still make use of even today, that Microsoft allows us to make use of, is nearly 2 decades old, all right? And it's important to upgrade our password policy to disallow weak predictable patterns as passwords. So strengthen passwords with a granular password policy, enable two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication based on user convenience for your local, remote, and VPN logons for every single user. That is an ideal situation, but highly recommended. Every single user in your organization, MFA with biometrics, all right? And it's a simple one-click access, one-click selection to authenticators, a drop-down to pick the level of authentication that you'd like to enforce. And it's as simple and straightforward as that. And also be able to customize different authenticators, different policies based on different OUs and groups present in the Active Directory that you have customized. The user groups could be based on organizational roles, compliance mandates, departments, regional, geographical boundaries, regional restrictions, all that and much more. So work with granularly enforcing MFA for different user groups, and also be able to enable multi-factor authentication for applications as well. And with this, I can guarantee you that multiple users on an organizational level will also feel a lot more safer while logging in and accessing to their machines and their applications, and not be worried about their account or their data being susceptible to compromise. And you can also be rest assured that users' identities are protected with just a simple few steps that you can take on an organizational level to safeguard user identity security. With that, I am going to very quickly wrap up the session for the day. If you have more questions, please keep them coming. I am dropping in the feedback form on your screen. Please take a couple of seconds to answer the feedback poll that is on your screen. If you have any comments, ideas, suggestions, topics that you'd like me to talk about in the upcoming sessions, or criticism, please feel free to drop in a mail to me at sharat@manageengine.com or drop in your messages in the chat box. This will definitely help me improve this particular experience for the upcoming audience as well. And yes, you can write to me at any point of time for resources, assistance with AD Self-Service Plus, to generally have a quick chat about best practices, tips and tricks that you can make use of to protect user identities, or generally talk about IAM as well. That is my scope of expertise. And if you have more questions about other managed engine solutions, I promise to redirect you to the right resources. That said, for customers who are working with AD Self-Service Plus and also evaluating the application, we provide 24/5 customer support, technical support. So you can always write to us at support@adselfserviceplus.com, and we'll help you with your queries, your issues, your customizations and feature requests as well. With that, I am going to quickly wrap up the session for today. If you have more questions, please keep them coming. I'm going to take time to answer your questions offline. And before I check out of today's session, I quickly want to put this thought across. I wish, hope, and pray you, your friends, your family, your near and dear are blessed with great health and happiness. Let's come out of this pandemic as better, happier, healthier individuals. And that's my prayer and wish for every single one of you. Thank you so much for being a wonderful audience. Thank you so much for your time and patience. I really hope this session was informative and you have takeaways that you can apply on an organization level to protect user identities. Looking forward to meeting you in the near future in my upcoming sessions and hopefully in your country or mine. Until then, this is Sharda Murthy from the marketing team of Managing Gen signing off for today. Thank you so much and namaste. Please take care.